Philosophy at its most basic is a love of wisdom, and to do philosophy we ask basic questions. But before we can even ask questions, we have to presuppose that there can be true answers. The concept of truth entails that when something is true, its negation can't also be the case. Either something is true or it's false, never both. It's an all or nothing concept. A contradiction is when something is true and false at the same time and in the same way. The simplest contradiction is true equals false. If this were the case, truth would be meaningless and knowledge would be impossible. We couldn't even have coherent thoughts. We couldn't have beliefs that made any sense. In short, our state of mind and reality itself would be completely insane. But there are observable laws and constants. It's possible to do repeatable tests. In reality, something is either the case or it is not. The law of non-contradiction is the basis for logic, reason, truth, knowledge, epistemology, ethics, metaphysics, and all of philosophy, all of science. That an argument contains a contradiction is the most basic method of proving it to be false. A contradiction is metaphysically impossible. There is no possible world in which true equals false. Even skeptics of logic presuppose non-contradiction because they make statements they believe to be the case and they don't contradict themselves about those statements. To say I am a skeptic of logic actually means it is the case that I am a skeptic of logic. To say I doubt logic is to say it is true that I doubt logic. Any statement or conscious thought rests on the assumption that you are identifying something that's true about some state of affairs. Aristotle said that without the law of non-contradiction, we can't know anything. That's because to know anything, truth has to be possible. If something is true, its negation can't also be true. The biggest and most persistent objection to the law of non-contradiction is the liar paradox. There are many forms, but I'll present the simplest here. This statement is false, but all statements imply that truth is being identified and conveyed. To say this statement is false is to imply it is true that this statement is false. A simpler way of stating this is true statement is false. I agree that this is a contradiction, but it's also completely incoherent. There's no possible world in which there is a square circle, and there's no possible world in which true is false. A stronger version of the liar paradox is in the following form. The next statement is true, the previous statement is false. In other words, it's true that the next statement is true, it's true that the previous statement is false. In other words, true is false. This is incorrect, it's nonsensical, and it's absurd. Another common objection to logic is the often misunderstood world of quantum physics. I will only say that there are coherent interpretations of quantum mechanics which are logically valid, and any interpretation which is not logically valid is therefore incoherent and can't even be rationally considered. Would it make sense to say that quantum mechanics is both true and false at the same time and in the same way? If not, then we don't need to consider this claim. Non-contradiction is the foundational principle of everything reasonable and rational. Without it, there cannot be truth. Without truth, you can't know anything. Even if gods exist, not even a god could defy the law of non-contradiction. That would be metaphysically impossible. An incoherent god is one that we are justified in not accepting as true. The final and most strange objection to logic is the existence of multiple systems of logic. I'm not sure what this is even trying to prove, but the argument typically goes that since there are multiple systems of logic, then we aren't forced to use classical logic. We can use any system we want. Okay, well, so what? All coherent systems of logic avoid contradiction and embrace logical consistency. Suppose one made a system that accepted contradictions as true. That system itself could be said to be both true and false at the same time and in the same way. But truth would lose its meaning, and no rational conclusion could be derived from such a system. An illogical system of logic is an oxymoron, and I realize that systems of logic have evolved over time. Aristotle's traditional logic was sort of updated in the modern era to the current classical system. But if we want to be coherent, rational, and reasonable, to categorize things as true or false, to know anything at all, then non-contradiction is a prerequisite. If one rejects logic, then one can't know anything to be true. Philosophy at its most basic